I remember trying to describe to my parents what I was doing, and it was like, okay, so I said, so you go to like Home Depot to buy tools, right? Well, I make the tools that other people use to build things for people.
So welcome, David. Let's start.
Good to be here.
Yeah. Let's start by telling the audience just a little bit about your background. How did you get to where you are today?
Yep. So I guess I can start from like way back. I'm originally from Barbados in the Caribbean. Rihanna, you know Barbados. Fun anecdote, me and her went to the same school at the same time. So
whoa, are you friends with Rihanna?
There's some degree of separation, so I'm not her direct friend, but friends of friends, yeah, our friends.
Oh, you're basically sure. Rihanna.
It's the same thing.
Today
right?
we have on Breaking Changes Rihanna with a different name.
So I grew up like in Barbados. I had computers really early. My dad ran a computer store where he would fix computers, which is funny because he was an accountant, but he had a love for computers as well. So I had a lot of games growing up really early that I would like play games, love playing games on computer. And I had DOS and Windows. And,
yeah, me too. We had
right?
Gateway.
Gateway 2000.
Yeah, Gateway 2000, yeah.
So I think at one point my brain flipped from playing games to wanting to make games. And that was my first encountering like just trying to start coding and stuff. So I followed that passion all the way to, college, where I was like, okay, I didn't know what computer science was when I was in Barbados. It was more like, I want to do coding. So I ended up going to Florida for college, and I ended up doing computer science. And then I knew at this school, Microsoft came to do the career fairs. So a friend and I have been working on a game our first year at college. We got there, we found a shared passion for making games. And at the career fair, we kind of pulled up with our resumes, and we had this demo of a game that we built. We built the game engine. We built like the scripting language. Wow. It was just like a learning thing, right? And it got us internships. So he went into games. Amazing. I went to Microsoft, and I've been there like for 15 years, like from that time, ever since. So,
wow. What a story. So how would you describe your current job? So I believe your title is like distinguished engineer. Very important engineer.
Distinguished means I have great hair. Yeah, it's interesting. So when I think about the distinguished engineer role, what comes to mind is, first of all, when I joined Microsoft, I always wanted to be an architect. That was like my main goal, right? Because I had worked with an architect when I was like really early in career, and I saw what they did, and I was like, that's what I want to do. They make cool prototypes. They kind of have a spanning understanding of like all the things, the tech on the team. They were kind of a SME. They would build new things. So I was like, that's what I want to do. That's my role. And certain big tech companies, the FAANG companies, have specific tracks that go all the way up to basically corporate vice president, but without reports. So you can be a highly technical leader.
That's awesome.
That was a very rare thing that I saw. So I was like, okay, what would it even mean to kind of be in this role? And because it's Black History Month, when I joined, there were no Black distinguished engineers. There were none. And every year I would check to see is there one now? Is there one now? And no, there's two. I'm one of them. Oh
wow! Yeah, congratulations on being one half of representation at Microsoft.
You gotta start somewhere. But my role is very much sprawling. So I work on .NET. .NET, for those who don't know, is the programming platform. If you use C#, Visual Basic, F#, you could think of it, if you're a JVM person, .NET and the CLR are the equivalent of the JVM and the JDK. So I've been working on .NET for a long time, and I mostly spend a lot of my time building the server-side technologies. That is like from the web server to the web framework to the HTML renderers, to the tools that consume those, to tools that run in various clouds so that you can publish and deploy. So I kind of get it. I get it to touch a lot of technology because I end up being around the the top of the web stack kind of
Yeah,
career.
that sounds like a super, super fun job. David, how did you get from games to intermediate language representations?
I think what always tends to happen, at least with me in my career, it has been you work on an app and then you have some problem while trying to build the app. And that problem begins to overtake the app. So the first time it happened was I was working on the game engine for this game in college. My friend said, we need to have a scripting language. So, all right, let's build a language. So then the language became the whole the language became the whole project. The game was a demo. The guy could walk around, but the language was oh my gosh, I can write code then, interpret it and make it work. And that interest kind of just ended up growing towards developer tools. When I had my first internship, I got to work on the ASP.NET team, and we were building dev tools for building websites. And I remember trying to describe to my parents what I was doing, and it was okay, so I said, so you go to Home Depot to buy tools, right? Well, I make the tools that other people use to build things for people. Right? So that, and I think that analogy works well. So I work on tools for developers to build apps for other people. So, and selfishly, I get to build tools for myself.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that's how I got into developer tools as well. I grew up programming. I never really wanted to make a career out of it because I felt the tools were so broken. Who would want to work with these tools day in and day out? But then I realized when I went to college that these tools were just made by people and I could improve those tools. So then I said, I can do that. I can't commit to a lifetime of using tools if they're not going to improve. But if I can improve those tools, then I can get behind this.
I love it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So following up on what you said about, you are on a career track typical in the big companies. Is your day-to-day job typical for an engineer of your level? So, the other distinguished engineers at Microsoft, are they doing similar things?
It's so funny. I remember when I was, trying to meet other engineers at this level at the company just to figure out what they do, right? There's this spectrum of engineers, kind of people who are very deep in one area, people who are very broad in some area. One of our technical fellows created C# and TypeScript. So he codes like a super engineer. He just writes insanely large pieces of code and sends pull requests to TypeScript. You can go see it. It's all public. Then we'll have other engineers who are not coding as much, but are very sprawling and kind of knows every part of the product super deeply, right? One thing I tell people is part of my job is to be a product manager and an engineer. So I have this skill, I would call it, where you kind of have the breadth to understand the business and then the depth to kind of dive in and go, we can't do that in a code because that's not how we write code. So as an example, last night, I went on a coding bender for some 4 hours, and I wrote a new feature. And
4 hours for a new feature. That's pretty good.
I was trying to make it 2, but I got lost. It was super late.
Wow.
But then today I'm doing a presentation for the C-suite to show them what we're working on. So being able to kind of balance those two things is kind of what I think makes you scale at this level, because I can't code every feature. Right?
Yeah.
But I'm trying to make sure that all the screws are in place, right? We're building a big picture, and we're trying to make sure that all the pieces are in place. And I try to have technical depth in all the areas so I can make sure that they're being done the right way. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So I'd be super interested to dig into how you impact the code that gets written outside of yourself, because typically I think people are generally familiar with engineering leaders who influence through the teams that they directly manage. But when it comes to your impact through influence, what does that look like for you? How can you convince other people or teams to help you on the projects that you want to do?
Yeah, I love that. So one of the things that I think I learned early in my career, I was maybe a senior engineer, and I had built this side project called Signal R with a teammate, and it was on GitHub. It was open source. And eventually that project became an official Microsoft project.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a team of 7 that like got funded. And I wasn't the manager, but I was the lead. Right. So I was the technical lead for this project. And all I had known up to that point was how to like write code well and fast and to kind of get things going.
Yeah.
But I had no semblance of how to kind of like train or help junior engineers or have them be mentored. So we had 2 new college hires that were really smart, but were green. They were new. And I recall whenever they had issues or bugs to go fix, it would take long and I would get annoyed. Like, you know, I could do this myself. I'm much faster at doing it. I have more context.
Yeah.
And then about 6 months in, some switch flipped and they were insanely productive. And I had like invested time in kind of helping them, you know, kind of grow. But, you know, in the back of my head, I'm like, I could do it faster, but I'm still helping, not knowing if it will pay off or not. Seeing it pay off and seeing us be able to like kind of do more, change my entire brain about how I think about getting others to kind of like to a place where they can have their own impact. So I think that experience for me changed how I thought about being productive and impactful. If I could if I can set the path clear for 10 people, is much more impactful than me doing it all on my own.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And you know, based on your role right now, like what's the kind of buy-in you need to get to set the direction for other people on your team? So are you the tech lead and you have to get buy-in from a manager, a PM, or what's that structure look like?
Yeah, so I would say, so at my level, my peers are mostly like managers and directors. So a lot of what I do is I sit in planning, in the planning phase of the project where there's product managers and directors. And when we're trying to figure out strategy, like what are we going to do with cloud native, for example, could be one strategy, or AI, right, and ML. I will have a lot of input there.
That's the dream.
Exactly. Yeah, so you get to sit in a room and just say, we should do this.
You're like,
we should do
that, but not that. Yeah, I want to make this happen. Yeah, and then the managers are like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go do all my, you know, alignment and one-on-ones and all that stuff. Okay, that makes sense.
One thing I had to learn the hard way was at some point, I would say when you get a reputation, so part of your job as an IC is to have a good reputation so that others, because you don't have reports.
Yeah.
You kind of have people that you're trying to influence and people that you're trying to help grow. Yeah. And people begin to look up to you and like you don't even know it, right? So I recall, you know, at some point in my career, I was talking to engineers directly and they would just do what I said.
Yeah.
And their boss would be like, no, we're supposed to do X. And
How did you get so influenced?
So there's too much influence, right?
Yeah.
And you begin to learn that actually takes away power from engineering managers. So learning how to kind of work through the system so people don't feel like they've been cut over or left out is the thing that I had to learn to do as well, because that's tricky.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool. Did you ever consider going down the engineering people leadership route? Or for you, was it just, I want to be architect, distinguished engineer, that or bust?
Yeah. I got asked to be a manager 3 or 4 times. Every time I've said no. But I will say the last time I thought about it for a week. And it's going to sound silly, but like, at the point where I was in my career at that time, I didn't feel like it made sense to be a manager. I feel as though I do so much mentoring and so much people stuff already that's the way I get my fill of people, right? Yeah. And I don't have to have like reporting structure. And I don't have to do like reviews and all the stuff that like HR wants you to do as a manager. So for me, it was always a clear, like, I love the role I'm in. I get to mentor people, like, as needed, and I get to, like, do technical things. Because I love to build products. Like, that's kind of why I'm in it. I love people, too. I love products. I love building and engineering.
No, I think that's really great self-awareness. Okay. Well, okay. So on the topic of our namesake, breaking changes, I'd
Yeah.
love to dig into some of your work because if you're working on language stuff, I
Yeah.
feel like the fear is always introducing breaking changes or you have to do it judiciously. People are really
Yep.
opposed to it. So I would love to hear about, what's a breaking change that you introduced into the product you're working on? And like, how did you get, what was there resistance? How did you get people to agree?
Yeah.
How did the users get mollified?
Yeah. So it's funny. I think in general on the team, I am seeing a little bit. This is just from what I've observed as someone who does want to make breaking changes. Maybe more often than people want to. I'm less conservative than others for what we work on.
Right person to have on this podcast.
I'm the breaking change person, right? We should do X.
Yeah.
So a lot of my growth in the last, I would say, like 5 years, 7 years or so, has been like more empathy for breaking changes, right?
Yeah,
and
the people getting broken.
People getting broken, right? I mean, it's pretty bad, right? You don't want to break everyone.
Yeah. I
Working
feel
on
like,
a platform.
as the EM for our team, my biggest fear is breaking changes that get introduced into our infrastructure. Because that's like always roadmap unpredictability.
That is perfect. So yeah, but working on a platform like .NET, like C#, like we cannot introduce breaking changes in some places. There's been this, and discussions do come up. We like every couple of years, someone has a plan for how we can do it in a smoother way, in a better way. But as platform owners, we're kind of very responsible for making sure the stuff is like rock solid, that you can make breaking changes. At the same time, that hinders evolution in some cases. So on a case by case basis, we do decide like this is a big breaking change. It's too big. We can't take it. And I think if David now spoke to David 7 years ago, he would not believe the kinds of things that old David would not tell young David about. We can't make change X.
Yeah,
because I remember one big change we made like super early on in the .NET Core days. We tried and this is from me. We tried to rewrite the package manager, the build system, everything all at once. And there was a big fear that, that's too many changes to make all at once.
Yeah.
No one's going to adopt it. But I was super headstrong. This is better tech. Like people get used to it. We can bridge the gap somehow. 2 years in, and like money spent on trying to integrate all these things, I kind of realized it wasn't working, and I had to pull the record. I say like, let's just abandon ship and go the other way around. It was a good lesson to learn about. Even though changes are better, too much change, too big of breaking changes all at once can sometimes have a net negative effect.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Out of curiosity, what's one breaking change you successfully introduced, and how did you convince people to do that?
One big one that we had so many. Let me think, because I would say the biggest thing about breaking changes is trying to justify the impact, right? Yeah. So if we're going to remove something because it's insecure, people are very happy about it because we're more secure. At the same time, you're trading off being more secure for breaking like all of these customers that are doing
everyone has to upgrade. Thing. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So I would say, let's see, one of the breaking changes that we made, we fundamentally changed how authentication worked. From version 1 to version 2, and it was like painful, but it was more intuitive. Yeah. And for an area like security, you kind of want it to be intuitive because doing the wrong thing leaves you open to security holes. So those kinds of changes, people are like, we hate this, but we agree.
Okay. And did your team resist you, or they were pretty bought in quickly on that?
At the time, the team culture was like, we should make the change.
Yeah. Okay.
At the time, I think
but
seeing
then
the
once
reaction,
you started making it, and it was so painful.
Yeah, the customer reaction was painful, and because of what we work on, we end up having to support library authors who target both old and new versions. That was where the pain was felt the most. So
Yeah. Yeah.
customers upgrade fine. They're like, oh, new APIs, we're all good. Customer
Yeah.
uses library that references the old version,
Yeah.
hasn't been updated yet. Like that becomes a real pain.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, on the subject of another kind of breaking change, you have a dream career for people who are very technical and love building stuff. But I'm sure, getting here wasn't without breaking changes in your own psyche or
I love
life.
that.
So I would be curious to dig into, what's like a mistake that you made and learned from, or just like a way of thinking that you had to really change in a breaking way to get to where you are today.
This is a very relevant topic because I got feedback recently about kind of things that, how the behaviors that kind of get you to a spot can kind of stop you from going further.
Yes.
So there's a lot of weight behind my request for stuff. So I may say something like, we should be doing X, right? And me thinking that I'm like dev 1 or 2 in that engineering mindset, just trying to get stuff done, trying to keep my hands on all the things and get things covered. People sometimes feel as though they can't push back, or they may feel suffocated, right? If I'm just there.
Yeah. I've actually given very similar feedback to one of our senior engineers, and he said, well, I'm just an engineer.
Yeah.
Why are people so afraid of me? But it is true. You accumulate a lot of gravitas over the course of your life.
Yeah. So I think that hit me in slow motion as I kept going up.
Yeah.
But I think you begin to really consider how you have to show up. And you have to not take over every meeting, and you have to kind of like wait on others, ask others to speak up, if they aren't speaking up. So I think that was a very big behavioral change for me. Sometimes not coming to meetings, literally not showing up in design meetings, because if I'm there too often, maybe it feels like I'm watching everyone. Right. So there's a lot of interesting.
Because I feel like if you have direct reports, it hits you very early. You're like, oh my God, I have these people whose lives I'm responsible for, their salaries, their families, their immigration status. But I think, impact through influence does feel and look different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's challenging. I had to tell an engineering manager that he could tell me no. So I was asking for features. I was like, we got to do A, B, and C, and D. I think in his head, he was like, this is a distinguished engineer. I have to make it work.
Yeah.
And I said, no. You can tell me that we can't fit this and make me prioritize. Like, tell me this is too much work and we have to do A, B, and C. Right. So there's a lot of small things that kind of you forget sometimes. And then people remind you, hey, when you use this language, like I was thinking, or I think we should do X, people may think that I already made the call. And I'm not asking for feedback, right? So I am very thoughtful about my language, thoughtful about how I show up. So there's a lot of that I think changed for me in the last 5 years.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I didn't really think about it that way before, but in some sense, I feel like, when you become a manager, you're not technical anymore. And so engineers can feel okay pushing back because they're like, well, my manager doesn't know the technical details. But as a distinguished engineer, if you're an engineer or even an EM, you assume that person has all of the details plus more. And so, it can feel really hard to push back. Okay.
Yeah. I had someone tell me it's intimidating because you have so much context.
It's really the knowledge.
Yeah, and it's tough, right?
Very powerful.
Like, I understand that, and like I just want to support whatever we're doing. So I want to have debates just like you, but you have to. I think the tough pill to swallow is that it just isn't even footing anymore, right? Like there's way more influence to things that I say than like someone else says. So I had someone ask me, "Can we use your title to kind of like ask that team for a thing?" And I'm just like, "Huh?"
Oh, I love it. That's really funny.
Oh,
okay. Yeah, I'm sure staying at Microsoft for 15 years also, like anyone who stays at Microsoft for 15 years probably has, a lot of context and a lot of respect whenever you say anything. But having that longevity plus the title, I'm sure just no one can even say no anymore. So a related question I have is, how did you decide to stay at Microsoft for that long? Because, that's a high multiple on the average tenure, at
Super
a
long.
company for a person in the industry. So, I mean, was it a conscious decision?
Yeah.
Was it, just like a series of things that happened?
Yeah. This is a really fun one. You know how people say things like, I am 10 years into my 5-year plan? I never had a 5-year plan, right? So I have been working here since I did 2 internships, joined full time. This might be been my only job the entire time. I
Yeah.
think a combination of things kind of kept me here. One was I got to work on a new project within the same team like every 2 years.
Yeah.
So I
Awesome.
felt like I got this like breath of fresh technology to work on,
Yeah.
and interesting problems to work on, new things to learn. And that
Mm-hmm,
didn't run
mm-hmm,
out in my earlier days. At
mm-hmm,
one
mm-hmm.
point, I did do interviews. Like, I remember when I hit senior, I remember people saying, you should go, check your worth and see what you're worth in this
Yeah.
industry. See, and I went on a tour and I went interviewing at other companies like Twitter, X, no, I
Yeah.
guess, GitHub before we bought it. And I remember getting offers, and I was thinking of going to move to California, like go to work at GitHub or
Yeah.
whatever. Didn't end up going. There's a lot of, I would say, getting to where I am now at Microsoft. There was, I think, a lot of thoughts that I could do this, that I could get
Mm-hmm,
here.
mm-hmm.
So I had a lot
Yeah.
of my mentors at Microsoft telling me like, hey, you're going to be this, you're going to be that. And to an impressionable young man, I was kind of like, oh, you believe I can do that? Okay, I'll stay, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. So,
Yeah.
a follow-up question was that, is that some of the companies you're looking at, did they not have a distinguished engineer architect track, or,
They did.
um,
They did. I think, and it was the first time it happened, it was a tough decision because like I remember this was when Twitter was still private.
mm-hmm,
They
mm-hmm.
weren't like public yet, and then they went public maybe a year afterwards. I was looking at the money like, you're stupid, David. You're stupid.
Yeah,
You're stupid. Like, you should have gone to Twitter. No regrets long term.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I think I had a like really good support. I had
Yeah,
good sponsors and good mentors.
that's awesome.
When I was going to look to leave, like they had me talk to like our VP and like all this
Mm-hmm,
stuff, and I was
mm-hmm.
kind of like, okay, they kind of
Yeah, they
want
care
me to
about
stay.
me.
They care
Yeah,
about me a
it's a
little
good
bit. Maybe
situation.
is
Yeah.
this corporate or is this like a real?
Yeah. Is this a
Yeah.
family? Yeah.
Are we family? We're not family. No, but I think the network support, the things I worked on, I hadn't been looking to leave. It was
Mm-hmm.
just like I had a chance to go look around, and I did.
Yeah.
More than once, and it just nothing grabbed me at that point in time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I also feel like there's like often misguided advice that you have to like move every few years, and that's how you get the high title.
More money.
So
Yeah.
yeah. But I feel like there's a lot to be said for like staying in one place, being that person who just has more context, and it becomes really valuable that way as well.
Yeah. I will say, like being around for a long time, you begin to realize the breadth of knowledge because you forget what you know. And then when someone new joins and they say, you know so much now, I'm like, I just been here the whole time.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
about every decision we made. I know everyone that was good, how it turned out, how we fixed it.
Wow.
Actually, I think that depth is really, really like super important and good, right? Because
Yeah.
it's not just about being like a gray bear to tell people, hey, back in my day when we were doing X, Y, and Z, this happened.
Yeah.
It's like real lessons learned, building
Yeah.
something, watching it get used, appreciating all the bad and good choices that you made yourself. You're like, we were going to have an interface here. And that was a good idea 7 years ago, but turns out 7 years later,
Yeah. No, I love people with long tenure places when I'm hiring for that reason, because I feel
nice.
like you can just compound your understanding of how systems work so much
Yep.
by watching how stuff plays out. Because like our recruiters are always like, you should take this person. Stints are really short in the industry anyway. And I'm like, no, you learn very little if you're somewhere, 2-3 years, and then you move somewhere again, 2-3 years. Like, 1-2 years. It's just like you can't, like, you don't see how stuff breaks down over time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny. When we ship the first version of .NET, people always leave after 1.0 because you super stressful time. You're working on the first version.
And you're like,
you
I
don't
did
know
it.
what's going
Shipped.
on. I did it. You ship. Seeing the implications of your decisions and like having to like reckon with that was a big thing for me. And it was like, wow, how do we adjust this thing that we thought was so good? Given these constraints, like that, I think that kind of grows you faster as an engineer.
No, I really agree. And I think also just seeing the impact of organizational change a few years out, you learn like, okay, this is good for 2 years, but, stuff's got to change after that. I think it really makes a difference, if people stay somewhere longer. It's like exponential wisdom per additional year.
On the .NET team, I don't know what it is about this team, or like my org at Microsoft is the developer division, where we build tools, like it's where GitHub is and VS Code, etc. The people on .NET have been there for super long, 20 years, 15 years, like almost 30 years. Like people working on the JIT and the GC and like the super deep technical parts of the stack. They've all been around for super long.
I feel like a lot of DevTools stuff, there's just a level of craftspersonship that is not generally appreciated. Like if you're working on an app, like consumer apps come and go. Of course, you stay there like 3 years. But, some pieces of software, they're forever. There's a lot of details involved, I think that's like an underrated difference of DevTools. Okay, cool. So, related to just questions about, how you are effective in your job in general, I'm sure there's lots of changes, in the org and in the industry that you need to stay on top of and respond to in order to make good strategic recommendations. How do you identify what is a change worth paying attention to?
Oh my gosh, this is a good one. So I love Twitter, X, whatever it's called now. I love social media. I read some blogs, go on Reddit. I kind of have a set of places that I read and consume information from constantly. And I don't know how I do it so often, but I do just consume a lot of stuff.
I'm just really fast content, at understanding.
Consuming content. Exactly.
I surprise myself with my abilities.
This is weird. And I kind of have this like, in the back of my head, I have this like scale onto I track individual topics. So as a bad example, Web3, right? So here's what happened to me 2 or 3 years ago during pandemic time. I am seeing Web3 everywhere.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if I have to care about this thing. Can I ignore it?
I do the same thing. Yep.
Right. And like you ignore it for a year and you're like, okay, it hasn't gone away
and you're
yet.
Like,
Let me go
I have to read about this.
and then I go deep. I have to like play with it. So I'm playing with it.
Yeah.
And I cannot figure out what the hype is.
Yeah.
And I am just like, I remember
you're right.
was on Twitter. I was on Twitter, like trying to figure out like what this thing was and why it was important.
Yeah.
And it just didn't click. The same thing happened for Kubernetes. So like during the war of orchestrators, we aren't sure yet, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't think it's a scam or anything. It's definitely there.
It's definitely still there. But like for Kubernetes, during the war of orchestrators and Mesos and Docker Swarm and Nomad, and you're kind of trying to just see what pans out, and everyone's arguing about different ones to use, and then Kubernetes keeps coming up. Like, it just keeps coming up in conversations at work, and like there are all these signals. And now I'm like, no, okay, now I have to learn enough of this so I can have intelligent conversations about what to do with it. Do we target it, etc. And I spend a Christmas like playing with it, like, and I play with things enough to figure out the mental model. So like, how does it work? What are CRDs? What's the hype? Like, how do you plug in? And once you get it, then like it begins to click, and you're like, okay, this is kind of how I think about this concept, and I don't have to go super deep unless required.
Yeah. No, I'm similar. I think you probably play with things more than I do, but at some point I'm like, oh, I have to go learn about this now. And then I ask a panel I've assembled of an informal panel of 10 experts. And then, I read some stuff and I'm like, all right, here's my take. Yeah.
Yeah. Same thing. It is, you're trying to it's funny. Your brain is trying to forget things as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And you're just like, okay, this thing is coming up like in my space.
Yeah, it's just like, I'm hearing about this 100 times a day. Why? Yeah.
So AI is exactly the same thing. Like the moment Copilot was working, like my org, like we built GitHub Copilot. And like you can imagine, like people are trying to build things with AI like everywhere, right? So I ignored AI for a long time. I was like, if the robots kill me, I'll be retired by then. Like now I am definitely learning about LLMs and like just all the nomenclature, all the words, all the like the syntax, the things you use. So I think part of my job is having enough knowledge for when big things like this happen, I have to understand how to synthesize the big understanding and like kind of like apply it to what I'm working on, apply it to what we're doing as a business, right?
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, I mean, your job sounds super fun. Your role sounds very important. How do more organizations nurture great technical minds who want to be that architect or distinguished engineer role?
I love this question because I'm actually part of an effort at Microsoft started by a couple of people with my title to try and foster more of this stuff.
Yeah.
I think it does.
I think a lot of organizations would want something like this, but there aren't so many models of this is how it works, especially in a smaller company.
Yeah, absolutely. In Microsoft, I would say the process from going past a certain level, like I think what everyone calls like staff or senior staff and beyond, it's kind of not. It's not. There's nothing. There's no straight path. Everyone has their own path. Once you get to that point, everyone's a unique snowflake. Right? It's like 1%. But I do think fostering the ICs coming up to be able to like reach and to like want to get there is a big deal. So I think it requires all the training I have done for leadership has been around engineering leadership and trying to manage people. One of the things that I want to like do as part of this effort we're doing is talk about technical leadership and technical strategy. Engineering strategy, right?
Yeah. One of the reasons I wanted to have people like you on this podcast too is I feel like so many of the literature, podcasts, and discussions out there around people management, but there are a lot of engineers that I know and some that I manage that have no interest in people management whatsoever. And I just find the guidance on how do you tell them this is what's coming up, this is how to do better in this, like that that's even just not very mature across the industry.
So I agree. And I think one of the things that I have a bee in my bonnet about is I want to hear technical leaders talk about how they built stuff, talk about lessons learned, talk about, and not just like super high level, talk about like strategic mistakes and strategic, like, how did you choose to go with X versus Y? It doesn't have to be an interface, but if we were going to build, I don't know, a brand new language, what made us do that versus investing in X, right? I think those discussions, I want to see more of, like, how do you make big technical strategic decisions, and then how do you execute? Like, what helps you execute, right?
So it's interesting because I used to be in academia and I was in programming languages. And in academic programming languages, you actually get those discussions. And I have not heard one talk on this since coming over to industry. But we would have Don Syme give talks and demos. Like, this is this is how I did this. This is a mistake I made. And like a lot of the great minds in programming languages and programming tools are at Microsoft, and they are distinguished engineers. So we would get those talks. talks in the research division.
I see.
But outside of research, you just really don't see that. And I think it would up level so many of even, engineers that I've managed, because engineers have to be technical, but a lot of the mentorship and the role models are, this is how you succeed in business impact. But sometimes business impact comes from making the right technical decisions, and technical role models are the best people to provide that.
I love that. That is actually pretty super awesome. You got Don and probably Anders and
so I interned at Microsoft Research twice, and so we got those talks in Building 99. So we had Don come by. Cool. We like. I also I was at Facebook, and I think a lot of the dev tools people are at Facebook now, but you would get those talks, and they would come by universities and talk about, this is how I did this. These are like, this is why this migration didn't work. But like, I don't feel like it's valued outside of the research world as much. And I feel like I learned a ton, because I feel like a lot of people be like, well, you were just in research for so many years. And like, look, I got so much of that technical wisdom because like people actually talk to us about this stuff. So you learn like, this is how these big migrations fail. You learn like, this is why you can't break your language users. And we got a lot of those talks, which I really appreciated.
I love that. So as a super dumb example, when I interned at Microsoft, and I had just taken compilers class, and I loved that class. I love to make a language. So during my internship, I wanted to build a new language that compiled to IL, right? Just for learning's sake. And I was at Microsoft, so I looked at the source code for C#. And what I had learned at school was you use like Yak or Lex to have a parser and a lexer. And like a hand roll parser is primitive. Why would you ever hand roll a parser, right? And the C# parser was hand rolled.
Yeah, well, it's just like you need to make it fast enough. Sometimes you need to like mess with the precedents.
Exactly. Yeah. And if I had gotten the talk, like just going from what I learned in textbooks to building an industrial grade compiler, like just hearing the lessons you learned and decisions made and why that happened, and
I think that stuff is huge. super useful. And I think for me the other big thing was I interned at Google one summer, and I just spent every night, I would stay late at the office and I would read the source code. Big table and MapReduce, and it was such good code, and really like I learned a lot from that. But not everyone gets to just like go work at Google and read the big table code,
But I love those talks on like lessons learned building X or building Y or
like when I did grad school, we got a lot of those talks, and I think that's one thing that like I think people really really like undervalue in industry. I'm really in support of that, because I think that would just up level the engineering orgs across so many different places.
That's my hot take too. I think that there's and trying to find training for ICs. Like, what does training for ICs even mean?
I love that. And I feel like sometimes my grad school friends and I would be a little bit snobby about, people who didn't come to grad school. So we're like, how are they learning all this stuff?
I love it.
I think there's like two ways snobbiness. Okay. All right. So those were all of my mainline questions. We're going to go into the closing questions now. First one, what are the most underrated breaking changes in the industry right now?
It's a good question. I think AI is both underrated and overrated at the same time, depending on the use case. I think, and I was here maybe last year, where people were kind of like, oh, Copilot is amazing, but it's super annoying and it doesn't work very well, and I turn it off. And I think people don't really understand how it's going to change what we do every day.
Oh, yeah. No, I completely agree with that. I did my PhD in a research group that was working on program synthesis. So like, how do we automatically generate programs?
Yep.
And my big complaint to them was everything was in the compiler loop. And I said, look, no one is ever going to trust this stuff in the compiler. So I just made fun of them all the time and forgot about them. And then Copilot came out and I was like, oh my God, I stand corrected. The compiler loop was the wrong loop. It's the editor. And so I just tweeted for like 10 days straight about how like I was wrong in life. Like, AI and the editor loop is going to change everything. thing. So yeah, I completely agree with you. And a lot of the things people complain about, I feel like they're really incidental. Cause like I had seen like vision of, what it can do for years. I just thought it was the compiler was the wrong place for that stuff. Yeah, but like in the editor, like, oh my God, we're never going to do so many things again. Like boilerplate, thing of the past.
Yeah, and I think devs are like the most interesting customers. They're very stubborn, stuck in their ways. Like my patterns are, I want to use VI and Emacs. I'm stuck on that pattern. My key things are configured. Like
well, devs get really rewarded by like really optimizing for now.
Yeah, exactly.
And like resisting change, because like inertia is most often good for an engineer. Jumping on the new hot thing just like makes your system unstable.
Exactly. So, but I will say like having used it enough to like figure out how to use it efficiently.
Yeah.
It makes me happy. It makes me worry. Because I'm like, wow, this is like this year. And I was kind of saying stuff like last year about how you can't just generate enough code to do X. And now I'm seeing it do X the next year. And now I'm like, okay, I can't predict 5 years. I'm done saying anything about the next 5 years.
Okay. And maybe this is your answer to my next question too. But I have to ask, what's your hot take on the breaking changes that AI is going to introduce? I
am an optimist. So I am very hopeful. I am like, this is going to be amazing. We're going to be so much more productive. At the same time, I am scared. There's a lot of like, everyone's super happy about spitting out more code or like spitting out more content. And I think we're spitting out content for humans today, because that is what the whole idea of having a human in the loop to check and to verify. I don't know how long that will last. Who's going to invent the first language that's optimized for LLMs producing that content, right? I'm very hopeful, but I'm also like kind of unsure, right? So it leaves me in this kind of in-between state.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. What change, personal or professional, are you excited about in your life that you are willing to share with the audience?
That I am having a baby this year. 3rd kid.
Oh, yeah. Your 3rd kid. Oh my gosh. That is a big change. My friend had a 3rd kid this year. Although I feel like once you have 2, you're like really good at it. Yeah. And then especially if you decide to have 3, you must be a good parent already. Like.
Is that how it works?
Yeah.
That's good.
Like you wouldn't get a 3rd car unless you were good at driving, I
love that. Yeah. That's funny.
That's
going to be a huge change. Huge
breaking
change.
Yeah, congrats. That's exciting. All right, cool. So for anyone who wants to hear more from you, where can they find you, and what should they read?
I'm mostly on X, but I'm also on Mastodon, and I am on. This summer, I joined like 4 networks, and I only use X. It's like Mastodon, Blue Sky. There was like 2 more that I joined, but.
LinkedIn.
I'm on LinkedIn. LinkedIn apparently is a social network as well. Reddit.
I am. After, during the X roller coaster, I feel like my main social network became Nextdoor. I don't think I'm moving in a good direction in life. Like I've been writing like treatises, like this teen speeding problem, really. And people are like, thank you for this call to arms. And it's like.
That is funny.
Yeah.
Nextdoor is a social network, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm really into Nextdoor because Ring doesn't let me post my post ever. They're like, this is not a crime. Reject. But Nextdoor, I can post whatever I want. No censorship.
That explains so much about Nextdoor.
So everyone who wasn't allowed to post a Ring and has no forum got deplatformed on Twitter by all their followers going to Mastodon. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. So I'm sure people want to be hearing more from you, and I look forward to seeing what you come out with up-leveling ICs. I would love to share that content.
Awesome. Good seeing you.